pastoralists in the modern world. Explain why nomadic tribes need to move from one place to another. What are the advantages to the environment of this continuous movement? See, the nomads are people who do not live at one place. That is, they don't live at one place, they move from one place to another for their living, to earn their livelihood. And the main occupation they have is cattle rearing, for which they need availability of water and pastures for grazing their animals. But if one pasture is depleted, they move with the animals to other place, looking for the pasture and water. So when the water and pasture get depleted, they move again, and they keep repeating this cycle. So what are the advantages? The movement of these nomads allow the pasture to regrow. If they are going here, this will regrow. If they are moving this place, this will be regrowing and recovering. It also helps to protect the ecology of the environment and prevent the overuse of the pastures. That is, only one pasture is not being overused. The cattle, they produce dung. So this is an important manure, or you can say a kind of fertility enhancing stuff for the land, for the agriculture land, for the pasture land. Discuss why the colonial rule or colonial government in India brought the following laws. So these are 4 laws. In each case, explain how the law changed the lives of the pastoralists. So first is waste and rules, or what is called the wasteland rules. So the colonial officials, they see all the land which are not cultivated or uncultivated land as wasteland. Why? Because these lands are not providing them any revenue or any agriculture product. So the colonial government wanted to bring this grazing land which is producing no revenue under the cultivation, because they want revenue and they want some agriculture goods, especially the goods, or you can say agriculture of those crops that are called cash crops that can be made to send to England or other European countries. So according to this wasteland rules, the uncultivated lands were taken over and given to selected individuals who were granted certain concessions, and they are encouraged. These people who are given these lands are encouraged to settle these lands and to grow or to cultivate. So the expansion of this cultivation inevitably meant the decline of pastures, because if this is a land, this is a pasture land, if this area is taken over for cultivation, only this land will be available for the pastoralist, and this will create problems and enhancement of the hardships to the pastoralists. The next one is Forest Act. By the mid-19th century, various forest acts were also being enacted in different regions or provinces of India. And through this Forest Act, the forests are now being divided into 2 categories: reserve forest and protected forest. Reserve forest means it is totally reserved. No pastoralist was allowed access to these forests. And these forests, why they are reserve forests being made? Because they produce commercially valuable timber like the deodar and the sal. That is why they are declared reserved. What about the protected forest? In these forests, some customary grazing rights, that is traditional or trivial rights of pastoralists, were granted, but the movements were severely restricted. They ought to obtain a permit from the authorities, that is the pastoralists, and the British believed that during grazing, the herds, they trampled over the saplings, that is the small plants, and munched away the shoots and prevented trees from growing. That is why they enacted these laws in order to protect the forests. The effect of the Forest Acts, what happened? Pastoralists could no longer remain in one area, even if the food or forage was available. They can only get inside or could enter only by getting permit for entry. And the pastoralists in the modern world, if they overstayed the specific period of time, they will be fined. They have a proper, say, a window by which or through which they can come and go. Their lives became difficult, hardships were there, and also the traditional rights were severely restricted. Criminal Tribes Act. So the British officials have a different thought. Those who are living at one place, say one house or a village or a neighborhood, they are good to them. But those who are nomadic, that is those who move, they are seen with suspicious eyes. They distrusted the mobile craftsmen and traders who hog their goods in villages, and pastoralists who change their place of residence every season. They are moving in search of good pastures for their herds. So these nomadic were considered criminal, and those who were settled were just thought as peaceful and law-abiding. So in 1871, the colonial government passed the Criminal Tribe Act. By this act, many communities of craftsmen, traders, and pastoralists were classified as criminal tribes, and they were stated to be criminal by nature and birth, these according to this law. So what were the effects of Criminal Tribes Act? After this act was enforced, these communities were expected to live only in notified village settlements. They were not allowed to move out without a permit, and the village police kept a very vigil, or you can say continuous watch on them. They could no longer move from one place to another. Then grazing tax. The grazing tax in India was introduced by the colonial government in the mid-19th century. So the pastoralists now had to pay tax on every head of animal they grazed on the pasture, that is each and every animal. So tax per head of the cattle went up rapidly, and the system of collection was made increasingly, you can say, efficient. So if you see between 1850 and 1880s, the right to collect tax was auctioned to the private contractors. So they tried to extract a high tax, but by the 1880s, the government began collecting tax directly from the pastoralists. So what were the effect of grazing tax? The pastoralists had to pay tax on every animal they grazed on the pastures, and the tax were quite high. The economic hardships of pastoralists increased thereby. Give reasons to explain why the Maasai community lost their grazing lands. So this Maasai community, European countries scrambled the possession of territories in Africa. So this Maasai belongs to Africa, and these European countries also sliced up the region in different colonies. So in 1885, the Maasai land was cut into half. That is, this is a Maasai land. It was cut into half with international boundary between the British Kenya and German Tanganyika. So the grazing land were also taken off. For whom? For the white settlers, and the Maasai were pushed in very small area, very small region like this, in the South Kenya and North Tanganyika. So the Maasai lost about 60% of their lands or grazing land which were pre-colonial. And now the peasant communities were encouraged by these British to expand cultivation, and pasture lands were actually converted into cultivated fields. Those areas which were large for grazing now turned into game reserves, like the Masai Mara, like the Samburu National Park in Kenya, and the very famous park Serengeti Park in Tanganyika, Tanzania. So pastoralists were not allowed to enter these reserves which belonged to them. They were not allowed to hunt animal or graze herds in these areas which again belonged to them, right? So very often these reserves were in the areas that had traditionally been regular grazing grounds for the Maasai herds. There are many similarities in the way in which the modern world forced change in the lives of pastoral communities in India and East Africa. Write about any two examples of changes that were similar for Indian pastoralist and the Maasai herder. So both India and East Africa were under the control and dominance of the European colonial powers with similar intentions and objectives these colony people have. In both places, the pastoral communities lost the pasture and land because the colonial power actually took control of these pastures and brought them under the cultivation, because for them this pasture land is waste. Why not to cultivate? Both in India and East Africa, forest laws were made and enacted, and the pastoralists were not permitted to use the forest for grazing or taking out the forest produce, which actually belonged to the natives. So in India and Africa, the pastures or the grazing land declined and created a lot of hardship for these communities, pastoral communities.